Welcome everyone. We're back for another learning session, another workshop where we're learning about the complexity thinking canvas today. We're just collecting more people. My name is Jos Colster, and along with Manali, who's my co-host, we will be running today's workshop, which will last 1 hour. This is part of the SI London Hub workshop sessions we do once a month. We started about 3 months ago. We've been working through some of the canvases on our website. We covered the system thinking one and a few others. Today we're looking at the complexity thinking canvas. It's going to help us become better complexity thinkers. That's the aim of the game. Manali is going to share the mirror board link with you. It is a workshop, so we'll mainly be working on the mirror board here. She will also pick up any questions or comments you may have as you go along. If you want to question something, if you have ideas, anything you'd like to share, you can post them into the chat and she will pick them up and we can discuss them. So let's get started. And whilst we're collecting people and whilst you're joining here on Miro, you might like to play around and get familiar with Miro. Hopefully you are already. If not, you just want to, very basic functions, you just zoom in and out, normally on the trackpad of your computer, and then you double click to drag a dot here. You might like to put it where you are in the world today, just to get warmed up, and also we'll be using stickies. Okay, we better lock that down. We'll be using stickies also, so lock. And you can find that on the side here. You just click there and you click on the sticky and then you type away, and that's how to do that. So today's event is being live streamed onto YouTube, so it's being recorded for those who can't make it. Does everybody have the link? Everybody found their way to the mirror board? Does anybody need help? You're welcome to post into the chat if you need any assistance. Great. Looks like you're getting a hang of this. Lots of people in Europe, a few in North America. South America, a bit late for Asia actually. It's mainly going to be Europe and North America. Okay, so hopefully you have the hang of mirror board, and we can move on and take a look at what we're talking about today: complexity thinking. This content is all based upon the resources we have on our website. I've been teaching complexity theory for about 7 years. We've produced a number of different courses. There's also this canvas we'll share. You'll find it down below here. When we come to the end, we'll share that with you. There's a guide also that this is based upon. So we'll share those links with you, and also on our website, you'll find many more resources, but that's where it's coming from. It's based upon complexity theory, and this is a very complexity theory. It's a science. It's a very sophisticated body of knowledge, but this is a very lightweight version of that, trying to abstract away the kind of basic principles, the basic ideas that we can then use kind of in our everyday world to start thinking in a different way about the systems around us, the systems we form part of, the systems we're trying to manage, the systems we're trying to design. And derive new insights, new ideas, new ways of doing things from that. So this is the canvas here. It could be useful in many different contexts, actually, for teaching, or, as I say, in a kind of workshop format to try and get people thinking in new ways. The canvas is designed to help members to try and change their way of thinking, a way of looking at the world towards a complexity paradigm. So you may have heard complexity theory. It's a new paradigm. A paradigm is a worldview. It's a way of looking at things. It's moving away from the kind of traditional analytical reductionist view of the world that's kind of dominated since the rise of modern science. since the beginning of the modern era, really. It kind of dominates our modern ways of doing management and engineering and many different things around here. And complexity theory is a paradigm shift. It's looking at the world in a different way, and that's what we're going to be doing today, trying to shift our thinking from one paradigm to another. So the exercise that follows will walk participants through a set of questions for them to think about how they currently see the world and how that may change for them to become better complexity thinkers. On the next page, on the following pages, we'll illustrate 4 key dimensions to complexity thinking. At the start of each arrow, we'll see here, at the start of each arrow is the reductionist way of looking at the world. And then we're going to follow the arrow to the right-hand side, and this is going to be essentially the opposite, a complexity way of looking at the world. And there's four dimensions to this, as you can see. The first one, we'll be walking through each of these as we go through. I'll be getting you to post up and exercise your imaginations as we do that and get familiar with this. But the first one will be this one, thinking about the difference between centralized systems and decentralized systems. What does it mean to look at a system from that perspective of kind of centralization? What does it mean to look at the world from this complexity perspective? We know complex systems are made up of all these small little parts interacting and reacting. It's a decentralized way of looking at the world. That'll be the first one. Second one will be this idea of self-organization. You may have heard of that. The shift from systems that are more orderly and predictable and controllable and essentially designed to systems that are more less orderly. They're a bit more kind of on the edge of chaos. Sometimes orderly, sometimes a bit random or chaotic. And how the little parts interact and may self-organize to create patterns over time. Second part, third one, we'll be looking at this idea of linear versus networked. Right, a linear view of the world is very much part of that mechanistic, Newtonian, reductionist view of the world. And then we're asking about what is this system we're looking at when we change our perspective, when we put on a different set of lenses, what does it look like from this kind of networked perspective? Each of these is really a paradigm, which means it's a way of looking at the world, and we can change that. We can choose to change that. And when we do change those goggles, we see very different things. We get new insight, we can get new ways of doing things. And then finally, this idea of evolution is kind of key to complexity theory. And this one's here is asking the difference between a kind of planned approach to development versus an evolutionary kind of organic feedback dynamic to the development of the system. So that's what we're looking at today, those 4 dimensions, try and help us become better complexity thinkers. And we're going to start here. The board's just moved slightly. Here we are. And each time we'll take a different system and we'll try and think about it through these different lenses. So I'll ask you on the left here to post up your ideas. What does it look like through this lens on the left? And then afterwards, we'll go here and think about what it looks like from that lens. So here, as mentioned, it's the difference between centralized versus a decentralized structure or architecture to systems. So what does it mean to look at a system as being defined by a few central components or actors? And then over here, we're going to ask about, now try to look at the system as a decentralized network of interacting parts. So here's your little challenge. I thought this would be a good system to choose, an interesting one, security. What does security look like from these 2 different perspectives? So from this more traditional kind of centralized view of the world, let's take a couple of minutes, maybe 3-4 minutes to post up our ideas. I guess you can choose either. Actually, if you want to go on both, you can do that at this time. So this one here on the left is the centralized view, and this is the more decentralized view. We're choosing security as a system. And we're looking at it through those two lenses. We're going to take a few minutes to post up our ideas. Any difficulties, any comments? Feel free to post them in the chat. Okay, let's take a look at this, what we've come up with. So on this centralized view of looking at security, checks, Big Brother camera system. Yeah, kind of feeding back information to some centralized control system, maybe. Security teams, data leadership doctrine leading, state leadership doctrine leading, best practice implementation, gated communities, creating boundaries and borders, home monitoring through private security firms, computer center. Yeah, we've seen these smart cities that have centralized command centers, something like that. Police Public policy on security are designed top-down. Central control and monitoring, yeah. Army, firefighters, planes. Hierarchical top-down formal institution. A few people at the center, and many people at the edges, and the bits at the edges are being controlled by the ones at the center in some way, or monitored or surveyed or whatever it is. Healthcare database, corruption, limited government, limited governance at scale, finance rules, the capital market, state and institutional centered, top-down chain of command, negative space enforcing security. Okay, and then to take a look at a decentralized approach is going to be very different. Standing for one another. Yeah, this is kind of peer-to-peer, isn't it? That maybe over here, the security is kind of a centralized specific thing done by police and Big Brother. Whereas here, standing for one another, it might be like a community watch scheme where we look out for each other's things and in such a way, done in a decentralized way. Active participation of communities on crafting public policies for security. Yeah, bringing in information from different parts of the system. Networks of shared interest, holding security. Yep, bottom up, distributed, no poverty, social equality and inclusive communities, common ownership, neighborhood watch, knowing your neighbor. Yeah, so the system, the capacities, the function is distributed out across the whole system instead of being concentrated in one part of it. It's maintained by a diversity of components in the network. Neighborhood watch, community-based, positive space, fostering resilience, systems and networks. So I think resilience would be a big part of this, right? Resilience is kind of a distributed capacity in a system. Healthy governance, open. Could be. This one's very much closed, isn't it? Kind of an aspect of centralized systems. They're closed. We talked about the hierarchical top-down formal institutions. It's very much a closed thing. It's kind of a secretive thing here. But over here, if we take these decentralized networks like blockchain and so forth, using decentralized security, they aren't so much closed. Like the protocols are actually open and anyone can see them and examine them and anyone can join those networks. So even though it's security, it's still open in some sense compared to this, which is very much a closed system, right? We have things like secret intelligence services and so forth here, and data centers that are very much secured and you can't go inside them. So many different doctrine networks. Community members' basic needs are met, crime rates go down. Yeah, we might even think about kind of preventing it in this world. This is very much a paradigm of, here it might be one of thinking about, well, how can we maintain a resilient network, a healthy network, so that we don't necessarily need this. This is a prevention kind of paradigm, right? It's very much focused on the police and so forth that are going to stop it happening. Here, it could be very much, how do we maintain a resilient, healthy system so it doesn't happen in the first place? Cooperative model, built-in quality security, acting through a systems lens, restorative justice, common ownership. Okay. Great. Hopefully that gave you an idea of what we're talking about there. Any questions or comments so far? Do you understand kind of what we're talking about here? Complex systems are, there's normally no centralized control in them. when you have this centralized component and control, that's very much takes you into a linear kind of regime, a linear way of thinking. It's very much how we do things, right? Education happens in universities, governance happens in, parliaments and so forth. Here in complex systems, we know the capacities and resources are quite distributed in the system, flock of birds or traffic, and so on. And that's a very different dynamic. It's a very different even way of looking at it and designing and managing and so forth.
Just Peter, I have two questions actually.
Yep.
So one of them says, wouldn't a gated community be part of a decentralized system where each community does its own thing?
That's more like, well, I guess this is more a distributed system. Yeah. I guess it's the underlying paradigm of when you centralize things, you start to create boundaries and borders around them. When you decentralize them, you start to open them up, actually. So it's that underlying structure. Yeah, but it depends on what level you're looking at this, right? Okay.
And there was just another, this was another one referring to the conversations on decentralized. It might also have consequences that have potential negative impact on society. So it is just a matter of defining it, then how to prevent or deal with it. Is decentralized not always better?
Yeah, for sure. We're not making statements. So we shouldn't be making statements about good or bad here, for sure. These are two very fundamental aspects of systems, and I definitely say that you need to adapt the system to the context that you have, and you normally need to balance, or ideally you want some kind of synergy between both, right? I'd say each of these has its failures. Actually, we were having a conversation in a training session earlier today, right? You think about Bitcoin is a highly decentralized system, but it also creates a lot of problems, right? And we're not able to switch it off. It chews up a lot of energy, and we're having problems there. So there are advantages of centralized systems, and there are disadvantages. Advantages of decentralized, and we want a synergy between them, really. So none of these are statements about what's good or bad. It's about a way of looking at the world and kind of structure and architecture to the systems we're dealing with. Okay, let's stay going for now, for the sake of time. Our next one is thinking about ordered versus self-organized versus designed. We're going to take the context of management here, how we manage our organizations. And these are two different paradigms, two different ways of doing that. And you can think firstly about what does this mean to take this designed, ordered approach to management. Just going to lock this down. This idea that order, we have a plan and order can be imposed on the system to achieve the optimal outcomes, as opposed to this idea here, which is more bottom-up. It's how the small parts come together in a bottom-up fashion to form new emergent patterns. So self-organization is a key part in complex systems. If there's no centralized control and capacities are distributed out, the order emerges out of the interactions between the parts in this self-organizing approach. And this is, again, another paradigm. You can look at anything like this, the rearing of your children. You could take this approach to them, right? Do they need a lot of order, a lot of structure that should be given to them, or should they be given more space to organize and develop themselves? Okay, let's jump in, grab sticky, and start on the ordered side. What does management of organizations look like in this world? What does it look like if we change our paradigm to this complexity thinking, this self-organized, emergent, bottom-up way of thinking about organizations? Take a couple of minutes for that. Okay, let's take a look at what we have here, thinking about management from these two different paradigms. If you have any comments or questions, you can put them in the chat. So from this ordered view of the world, that order kind of needs to be imposed on the system, it's focusing on formal organizational structure and communications. Yeah, we know that actually kind of, it leaves out certain things, doesn't it? It leaves out certain, you know, the social networks that are actually existing there. So in a way, it's a little bit artificial, but we impose it to give a sense of order. In some sense, it's top down. Yeah, it's imposed on the system. Even like the building of a house, you know, it's like we have a plan and we impose that on the system to make an orderly system like this. And then we do that same thing with how we develop almost everything, right? Education, we have a fixed structure of by years, and we have a fixed curriculum, and we have a kind of standardized way of teaching and so forth, and it happens within certain hours and so forth. There is a well-defined kind of top-down structure. It's not actually the person choosing for themselves what they would like to learn and when they would like to learn. So it has advantages, but it also has disadvantages, right? It can get in the way of kind of more processes, natural kind of processes, should we say, that are unfolding. Anyway, okay, so slower decision-making, limited innovation, competitive functions, telling, hierarchical, predictable and limited roles. Yeah, yes, it's very finite in nature. If someone comes up with a plan, it's very much limited by their capacity to kind of know things. Here, you can get this incredible kind of diversity and complexity in the system because it's not someone who's finite intelligence has defined what's there. So army soda make a plant, design leaders, collective thought is limited. Yes, that's an interesting part of it, isn't it? Kind of ends up with a few people making a lot of decisions. We never get very good collective intelligence in these sorts of systems, actually. Okay, government funding, strict performance and evaluation systems, silos, hard to change, assumptions or offer new perspectives to teams not in your lane or level. Yeah, it can quite often end up looking like this, silos. When we impose that kind of order, we create a structure, and that sometimes creates artificial boundaries and so forth, as I said, and results in silos and kind of fractured processes. Institutions are generally recognized and accepted as authority. Hierarchical institutions. Okay, great. And then over here, what does it look like? What does management and organizations look like when we think about it from these small parts coming together in a bottom-up way to form new emergent patterns? And again, you can look at almost anything. We're just choosing management here, but this is a perspective, it's a paradigm. We could choose almost anything to look at almost anything in this way. You know, traffic, you could think about it as, well, there's traffic lights and there's a traffic warden and that, you know, there's people organizing the streets and so forth. Or you could look at it in another way, right? All these cars and everyone choosing where to go, when to go and so forth, and patterns emerging out of that. Okay, so in the context of organizations and management, culture of collaboration, yeah, again, the kind of peer-to-peer thing, interaction between parts, ideas and principles rule the organization, sociocracy 2.0, trust, innovation labs, solutions in given context shared with other teams. Everyone can join. Horizontal. Yeah, that's the nature of self-organizing systems, that you can't actually impose order. When you impose order, you lose that self-organizing aspect to it. It requires this horizontal interaction between the parts. Actually, over here, the interactions kind of flow towards the center, or they flow upwards and downwards, and not so much horizontally. And you need that horizontal connection and peer interaction, like it says here, collaboration, to get that emergence so that the parts can organize, self-organize, right? Organize in relation to each other. Roles, so where are we? Horizontal, adaptive work, highly engaged. Yeah, it gives each member greater freedom and capacity. The other one's quite structured and ordered. So it's the structure, you kind of fit into a structure, right? In education, you just have to fit into the year that you put in. You have to learn the curriculum and so forth. Here, it might be more about you learning what you're interested in learning, right? So you can get much more highly engaged people and the parts in the system. More difficult for new members to navigate, could be. Yep, work happiness, agile responses. Yeah, it can be more agile because over here, the system is kind of holding everything in place and limiting the adaptive capacity of all the parts in it. Whereas here, the parts have a higher degree of freedom, so they can actually adapt and respond locally to the things that are going on. For example, in centralized orderly systems, quite often the information has to be sent to the centralized component and then sent back before it can adapt and change. Here, it's interacting locally, so it can be much more adaptive and flexible and resilient. Right, listening, teal organizations, worker self-management, optimizing use of people's skills, can jump on opportunities. Yep. Greater flexibility, greater capacity to adapt, agile teams, flexibility, team focus. Okay, crossover collaboration across sections. Yeah, you might not have these same kind of silos forming. You would have different kinds of networks forming, autopoietic, self-creating. Yeah, that's the interesting thing about self-organizing systems. They kind of create themselves, whereas these are very much created externally or from the top down. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. These ideas of kind of ordered design systems versus self-organizing systems. These ones these are a lot more organic, right? We know this is a lot of how kind of nature builds itself, and these are quite artificial when you see them. You see the order's been imposed on that system. This one here is typically a kind of a network structure of some form, you know, like trading patterns between different nations, right? Quite often they weren't planned historically. Those traders just decided to go and trade because there was an opportunity there, and a whole network can form. And they're often suboptimal, right? These systems, because no one's actually planned it from a top-down way, they've just emerged. Sometimes they're, as a whole, quite suboptimal, but they can be quite resilient. They can last for a long time because they're adaptive and flexible and so forth. So again, advantages and disadvantages to both. We're not saying one's good and one's bad. We're just saying these are ways of looking at the world. And then from that, ways of managing, ways of organizing, ways of designing, and so forth. Okay, should we move on? Everybody happy? Any questions? No, I don't think so. Okay. So that was thinking about, we've looked at centralized versus decentralized, ordered and designed versus self-organizing. And here we're going to talk about linear versus, someone was mentioning, maybe we should say non-linear or networked, whichever one you want. This one means that there's a direct line, say of cause and effect. This thing causes this. Whereas here, again, it's kind of distributed out. the cause and effect, the pathways of cause and effect might take multiple different directions, or there may be many causes, many causes for a given effect. So let's take a look at this. Let's think about a water system, actually. What's the difference between a centralized, what would a centralized water system look like, versus a networked one, a non-linear one? It's quite similar to the decentralized thing, but it's getting to the idea of kind of network structures in the system versus this linear model to it here. And we do a lot of things in a linear fashion around here. If we think about our electrical power grids, whole energy system, we suck resources out of the ground somewhere, we ship them around, we burn them up, turn them into energy, they get sent down big power cables and distributed to us. Traditionally how we do it, but we could do it in a different way, a networked way. So we're talking about water systems here. Let's take a couple of minutes. What would it look like from both these perspectives? Okay, let's take a look at some of the ideas here. Thinking about linear versus networked. What does it look like to see the system as a set of parts and linear interactions? One thing causing another, like two cogs moving, you turn one cog and the other one moves in a deterministic fashion. So reductionist, limited view of influencing factors. Yeah, a limited number of factors too. To get kind of cause and effect, you need just a few variables affecting the thing. You need to isolate those few variables and reduce down the number of variables. I think is what we're getting at here with reductionism. Highly organized, engineered. Yep. No feedbacks. Increased water. Easier to understand. Yeah, that's a good point. Like lack of kind of feedback, proper feedback loops is probably going to create problems. And we know that we have that with a lot of systems we've developed around here. Water maybe just being one of them, where a lot of it ends up waste. We keep on bringing it in here and we put that waste here, and that happens to a lot of our material systems. Promotes focusing on gaps in the system and fixing gaps without interactions. Yeah, fixing maybe the problems that are caused by lack of feedback loops. And it also goes back to kind of organizations also. We know sometimes that there isn't a proper feedback loop dynamic going on there, between people who are higher up managers and the people lower down. Information feedback doesn't function effectively. That's kind of a key characteristic of this linear view of the world. No choice in delivery of source. Unintended consequences can have high impact. Yeah, well, that's going to be part of it, isn't it? Unintended consequences, because if we're just looking at a few kind of linear interactions and a few variables, we're not going to see a lot of, it's invariably going to be embedded in a larger network, and we're not really going to see that from this perspective. Centralized water supply. Yeah, we probably capture it somewhere in a big reservoir, so it's kind of centralized too, and then it's pushed through pumps, it's pushed through pipes into a city probably, and then distributed. Doesn't take into account nonlinear effects. No feedbacks, increase waste easy. Okay, so that's the linear perspective on this, and this is the nonlinear one. What would the water system look like from this perspective? Increases the probability of efficacy. Recycling, yeah. So we're going to get feedback loops, and that'll make it possible to recycle and reuse things. Waste washing water used for flushing toilets. Yeah, it could be much more effective than this one, where it just comes in and flows through and goes out the other end. With feedback loops, we can really start to use things more effectively. Behavior, vegetable washing water used to water plants. Lower waste reinforcing and balancing feedbacks, more difficult to understand. Local sources can be managed locally and through networks to region. Yeah, this is kind of these are often kind of mass, well, they're centralized systems, so they're mass systems. Here, if you have this kind of networked thing, you can manage your own water locally. If you got this recycling going on, maybe you don't need to keep importing it from somewhere external. You can actually manage your own water. Balancing feedback loops. Fractal, self-similar, space-filling systems. Yeah, maybe using every part of the system in some way, because it's non-linear, it's networked, right? Instead of this just going straight through this linear model. Focusing, reductionist, right? Focusing on a few parts in the system. This one here is maybe able to use all the resources in the system in a networked fashion. So space-filling system. Includes exponential effects. Yep, when you get feedback, you can get exponential change. Individuals and businesses taking responsibility on the water draining capacity of the city. Yeah, it can surface important critical insights because interactions are key. Yeah, and you might not get as many negative externalities or unintended consequences if you're able to deal with the complexity, right? So that's going to be part of it. You're going to have to be able to deal with this kind of complexity of this network and this view of the world. Including leverage in systems can be more accessible with network. Finding leverage in systems can be more accessible with network thinking. Okay, great. Hopefully you get the idea of what we're talking about then. Just a little exercise again to help us think in networks instead of linear ways of doing things. Can be quite powerful, right? We could apply this logic to the way we do almost anything around here and kind of derive new perspectives on it. You know, this could be shifting in Mexico City. Parts of Mexico City shifted from capturing water in reservoirs outside the city. Actually, they had massive rainfall sometimes in Mexico City. It downpours. They have to take all that water out of the city because it builds up, keep stored in a reservoir, and then they pump it all the way back into the city. And it's quite expensive, so not everyone gets water. Some NGOs came in and they started building rain harvesting systems, little bucket-like systems people can put on their roofs. They can capture that water. They can use it themselves, or they can trade it with their neighbors, and you get this kind of networked effect. They can start building their own pipes and so forth. A user-generated system, much more effective at using the resources there. And it would be a self-organizing system also. This one would be a very planned, fixed, it's a centralized one. Okay, so I hope you see all of these are obviously interrelated. We're just looking through different lenses. All of it's kind of the difference between a reductionist perspective and a complexities perspective. We're just taking different dimensions to that so that we get a better understanding of this, we flesh it out. So on the last board here, we're going to think about evolution. So how systems evolve is two different ways that we could think about how they develop over time. Could be anything, could be an organization or technology, infrastructure, whatever it is. Is it planned approach? How do we understand systems development as a planned progression? We're going to do this and this and this, and this is our goal, and that's how we're going to get there. Again, it's kind of controlled through a set of stages where we control the parts towards a final goal. Or this one here, that maybe the system might be evolving through these feedback loops over time. So we're going to take the example of a city. We can definitely think of it through these two perspectives. We know there are aspects of it that are planned, but we know there are aspects of it that aren't planned, that are left to self-organize and evolve over time. So we'll just have a little bit of time. We'll just take 3 minutes or so to look at that and post up our ideas. Okay, let's take a look at what we've discovered here. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them in the chat. So this here, looking from the perspective of a planned development to the system. Again, it's going to be closely correlated to all these other things. The centralized, we know this is the way a centralized organization is going to approach its development. It's going to be orderly. It's going to be linear in some sense. We're going to do this and then that and then that. We're going to get to there. It's going to be this planned approach. Consider the environment as stable. Yeah, that's quite true. There's this certain assumptions about the past. The future will be similar to the past, and therefore we can kind of know it and predict it in some sense, and relatively stable. Making projections and implementing projects based on them. Yeah, you have to have some sort of assumption about you're able to know the world in the future, or else it's going to be very difficult to make these kind of plans. Project implementation happens a long time after its conception. Yeah, there's a big separation in time. Planning, how does planning itself affect the system? Some capacity to bounce back for known events, less flexible. Definitely less flexible, isn't it? Because you're saying up front that this is where we're going and this is kind of how we're going to get there. High stakes, long time to goal. Yep. Strategic foresight, defined by one group. Yeah, it's normally a limited number of people that are defining this. Problem creep stifles progress. Bounded rationality. Yeah, the people who come up with this plan are limited in their knowledge and so forth. They're bounded in their understanding of everything. Set constraints to development. Zoning by laws. Long time to get to goal. Okay, so that was, let's see, project implementation happens a long time after its conception. So that's the planning perspective of how we move forwards. So obviously the designed controlled approach, and here is the evolving perspective on how the system might evolve, like a city, right? We know there's a lot of people, a lot of actors. You can't control everything there. Some of it's going to evolve over time. Can't be planned. Emergence, yep. Path dependent. Urban growth that may happen in unpredictable ways. Yeah, there's certainly going to be some unpredictable here. Adaptive leadership, small coincidental events can have big consequences. Solving problems on the go. Acknowledges the feedback. Yeah, feedback is going to be a very important part of this in the way that it develops, and why small incidental events can have big consequences because of the feedback loop that's kind of compounding it and driving it in a certain direction. Designed by citizens. Yeah, it's kind of a selection process too, isn't it? If something works, someone does something, an innovation that works, then other people are going to see it and they're going to adopt it, right? And say, oh, that's useful, I'm going to try this. And then it becomes very prominent in the system. And other things that aren't useful start to die out. So that's how it's going to evolve in an evolutionary way. Understanding, so again, it's kind of a peer-to-peer organization here. Participatory governance, understanding and works on the basis of dynamic imbalance. Yeah, it's not going to be orderly and kind of predictable. Designed by citizens, social resilience, and network structure. Yep, a lot of peer interaction. Identifying growth by social impact. Okay, looking for emergent trends. Emergence cannot be planned. Okay, that says it all. All right, so our time is almost up. Just to recap, this is what we're looking at. We're thinking about we're working through the complexity canvas. Well done, everyone. Hopefully it gave you an insight into how this canvas works in case you want to use it yourself, or you just got to learn more about complexity thinking from trying to shift from centralized to decentralized thinking of the world, or way of looking at the world, from design to self-organized, from linear to networked to non-linear, and that last one from a kind of planned view of how the system develops to an evolving one. So I'm going to wrap up there. Manali is going to say a few words. Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to just, yeah, so thank you. I hope you've had a good learning through the canvas. We just wanted to capture your thoughts in terms of your experience in working on the canvas, and if there's anything that you'd like us to improve or any other comment you'd like to share. So there are 3 questions to which you can either rate or just add a comment picking up from a sticky note. So it'll just help enough for the upcoming sessions as well. And after that, we've included 2 boards on which the first one you have a link to get the canvas as well as a guide for complexity thinking in case you want to refer to it further, and just introducing the next event as well. We have a next event on leverage points on the April, so it's another learning session. So it's already on the community channel, so I think feel free to RSVP to this event as well. And just mentioning all of our social media channels again, along with our community channel. We have LinkedIn and Twitter on which we post our daily updates, along with the community channel, wherein all the events are listed as well. And on YouTube, you'll find the recordings for sessions like these to refer to it again, or in case you've missed any bit part of it.
Great. Thank you very much, Manali. Thank you, everyone. Well done. And we'll wrap up there and hope to see you again in a few weeks when we do our next learning session. It's this one here on leverage points in about 3 weeks. So I hope to see you then. Talk to you soon.